I love chalkboards. I know I'm a dying breed of teacher, but I always request to have a room with a chalkboard. Why do I do this to myself? Well, it's mostly nostalgia. The best math teacher I ever had was my dad. Give a little wave, Pops. I spent most of middle school and high school doing my math homework on his chalkboard in his office in the basement. He would be sitting at his desk grading math homework while I talked out my problems. He answered all of my questions with questions and rarely gave me any indication if I was right or wrong. He was so annoying. But he opened my eyes to how interesting math could be. Don't get me wrong, I had some great math teachers in my time. However, most of my math classes made me feel like I was good at math, but did not necessarily make me feel like I liked math. I learned to love math from my dad because he's a mathematician and treated me like a fellow mathematician. In Tracy Zager's book, Becoming the Math Teacher You Wish You Had, she has two wordles. The first wordle shows how math teachers viewed math as students. The second wordle shows how mathematicians view mathematics. I have always viewed math like a mathematician. This is why I wanted to become a teacher. As I took higher level math classes in college, the idea that math was creative and interesting was constantly reinforced. In fact, I was also a theater minor, and for my senior thesis, I directed the play Proof and wrote a paper on how the creative skills needed to direct a play were the same creative skills needed to solve a math problem. This is what I wanted to show my students, that math is not just a requirement for graduation, but a beautiful experience that explains the world. I got my MAT at Bard College, where I was taught to teach in a way that allows students to construct their understanding of math through exploration. I finished my year of grad school, and I was ready to change the world. Here's the thing. I left grad school, and I was a teacher. My grand ideas evaporated in the first 10 minutes of my first class. I had no idea how to teach math through exploration, especially when I had to teach topics like scientific notation. Gag me. My first 2 years of teaching were filled with prescriptive, teacher-centered lessons. Brain starter, teach a skill, independent practice, exit slip, lather, rinse, repeat. I knew it was awful, but I was filled with pressure and worry about higher test scores, students with gaps in their math background, not enough time, and too many standards. I knew I had to make a change, so I went looking for a new opportunity. So, where do high school teachers, tired of prescriptive, Regents-driven lessons run to? 7th grade. I started teaching at an all-girls public school in the Bronx. I was determined to create a math classroom filled with exploration and show these girls how cool math could be. I found teaching for exploration much easier in the 7th grade, mostly because of the structures of my school. I had 90 minutes. 90 minutes to teach math almost every day. I had shelves of manipulatives, which I became very protective of because the literacy teachers thought my integer chips were talking chips and were constantly trying to take them from me. My students were, I was teaching operations over integers, proportional reasoning, solving equations, and other great algebraic ideas. I had experienced teaching students missing these critical ideas, and I was trying to prevent those future misconceptions. About a year and a half into teaching 7th grade, my school was ready to build on a high school. I asked to move to the 9th grade because while I learned a lot from teaching 7th grade math, I'm not actually the biggest fan of 7th graders. I wanted to go back to a world where sarcasm was appreciated and whining was significantly less. I finished 7th grade and I was ready to move back to 9th grade algebra. I was not ready. I was going from 90-minute blocks to 45-minute periods. I couldn't get anything accomplished. In trying to create a 45-minute math lesson, I went back to bad habits of lather, rinse, repeat, mini lesson, independent practice, all of that. I was not happy, and I thought I had made a huge mistake. I did some reflection, and I made 2 changes. First, I decided to write lessons where my students would be able to explore and construct their understanding of algebra, knowing that this would take 2 to 3 days to accomplish. This meant that I had to overhaul my curriculum map. It's not possible for me to cover all of the standards and give 2-day lessons. I had to make some tough choices and choose the standards that would best fit my students' needs. I attended a metamorphosis PD, and I learned a lot about mathematical modeling. It made so much sense to me that we would have students learn math by solving real-world problems. My instructor at this PD had a saying. She said at almost every session, the people in this room are the lucky ones who survived their math education. We don't want to do that to our students. So besides letting myself give lessons for 2 days, I also started asking myself, I'm hitting the wrong button, sorry. Is this a just survive it lesson, or is it an own it lesson? Things got better immediately. There was life in my classroom again. My students were laughing, crying, debating, writing, and struggling. It was messy and beautiful. In the following year, I made 3 more changes. First, I spent a lot of my MFA money on manipulatives. I bought algebra tiles, square tiles, cubes, Cuisinart rods, integer chips, plastic cups, string, and anything else I thought my students could use as a tool to solve the math problems I threw at them. Second, I spent the whole first month of school creating a math community in my classroom. I did this by using Inspirational Week of Math from Joel Buller's site, U-Cubed. We also unpacked the math practices and explained why they would be our focus for the whole year. My students were learning how to use manipulatives, communicating with each other, failing, and persevering. Finally, I did action research for Bank Street's Math Leadership Program. My question was, what happens when I make my algebra classroom more student-centered? I was pushing myself to put more and more of the work onto my students. It has created amazing discourse in my classroom. My students are asking questions and arguing with each other. They are acting like mathematicians because I am treating them like mathematicians. So, do I still have lessons that I hate? Of course I do. I'm sure every teacher in this room has had that experience of writing a lesson, getting into the classroom, and all of a sudden you're transported back to 1986 going, Bueller, Bueller, Bueller. So what do I do when this happens? Well, I get real honest with myself. Why am I teaching this to my students? Do they need to know it? Do they have the foundation to understand this idea? But most importantly, I ask myself, am I treating my students like mathematicians? Because that's how they want to be treated. I know this because earlier this year, I had a student call me annoying because she was still thinking about math when she left for school that day. It made me smile and transported me back in time when I was calling my dad annoying for all of his questions. So I guess the question I'm leaving with you tonight is, are you annoying too?